Hey, Bill.
Hey, Matt, how's it going?
Doing great, doing great.
So this week in the Wisconsin showdown, we've had a couple of instances where the media, the old media is being led by new media, where various pranks and stunts seem to really shake up what was going on. And this seemed to have troubled you on Twitter.
Yes.
That our journalistic standards are declining.
Well, where to begin? I mean, I think this is a fascinating conversation, which definitely ties into blogging and new media, which is that, we do have these legitimate, I hate to use the term legitimate, but like organic news stories, like the what's happening in Wisconsin with the Governor Walker and the teachers unions. I mean, that's a traditional, probably a better word, a traditional news story. But what we've seen happen is bloggers or activists using new media technology have used trickery, such as the prank phone call where this blogger called up pretending to be David Koch, the billionaire, I'm not sure, funder of libertarian and conservative causes, and had like a 20-minute conversation with Governor Walker, which frankly I think is very skeevy to begin with. But that aside, the question then is, so now we're talking about it. You've got writers like political journalists talking about it and spending, this drives a whole, news cycle. It's completely manufactured. There was really no news that came out of it. And I think that maybe there's something good about this, but I'm also concerned that political journalism becomes not about, legitimate analysis or reporting, but really just chasing these stories, which of course incentivizes more copycat things. So, I mean, I've got a lot to say about this, but I'm going to shut up and let you weigh in. What's your take on this?
Well, I posted a tweet in a Facebook status, cherry-picking a bit out of the prank phone call to Scott Walker, because I thought it was notable that when the prankster said, let's plant some troublemakers in the protest crowd.
Right.
That the governor says, well, we thought about that.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to say, we decided it wasn't a good idea.
Right. Well, I mean, two things. Let me just jump in real quick. First of all, we've all been in those situations. And this happened to Congressman Brown, B-R-A-U-N, I think it is, from Pennsylvania. He was at a town hall meeting, apparently, another classic example of this being what we're all talking about now. Somebody in the crowd asked him, so when is somebody going to shoot Obama? Or something like that. And Brown just sort of brushed that aside and said, well, there's an election coming up, we need to focus on it. So Brown didn't condemn the guy. Right. But he also didn't encourage it either. He just sort of changed the subject to talking about elections. But obviously somebody wrote about it or was captured on video or audio or something. But my point is, number one, we've all been in situations where somebody says something to us a little bit weird or a little bit crazy, and we either then have a choice to condemn them for telling that joke, that horrible sexist joke, or just sort of moving on or laughing it off, pretending that you found it humorous. So that's kind of weird. I think it's whole skeevy to be taping people without their knowledge and all that. I think it's wrong. But here's the funny part, though, is I keep seeing pop culture repeating itself here. And maybe it's because I watch, although I have a newborn baby, a full-time job, and a wife, I still watch at least 8 hours of TV a day. But there's a 30 Rock episode where Jack Donaghy gets into a fight with Kenneth the Page. And Kenneth the Page, leads the Page into boycotting or whatever NBC, and Jack Donaghy sends in someone, a spy, to try to disrupt or a plant. So nothing that hasn't been thought of before, right?
Well, so I bring up that nugget. So when I put up my Facebook page, one of my old conservative friends. Took me to task on my Facebook page and said, you guys got all upset over the Acorn and the Planned Parenthood videos. Why are you heralding this as great investigative journalism? And I said in response, pranks should be treated as pranks. I'm not calling what the guy from the Buffalo Beast did as journalism. And I would not expect an actual journalistic outlet to take the piece that I cherry-picked and just run with that as a story in of itself, because it could well be that he didn't actually have some serious conversation about letting lawmakers. He might have just been being, sort of oddly polite.
Yeah, and this happened, as you'll recall, to Sarah Palin during the presidential race. I think it was a talk radio, some sort of a shock jock or something. I don't remember exactly, but she had this same sort of thing where during the presidential race, somebody called her, and it was a complete spoof phone call. Again, people are going to do this stuff. That's one thing. But then there's another question, like, should journalists be covering it? And now we have this problem where if you don't, somebody else will. But one question I have for you, Bill, is am I right to say that this drove a news story, or was this wasn't just a blog story? I mean, I know I saw this, I read about this in newspapers, I know I saw this on cable news. So this wasn't just something that we obsessed about on Twitter but didn't have any legs, right?
No, I think it had significant legs. I think it's a little bit hard to say what the political fallout of it is. Was it, as the governor was trying to characterize it, this just shows I say the same things in private as I say in public? Or is it a case of political embarrassment where he's being seen as acting very transparently political and not being principled in terms of trying to write the fiscal picture of Wisconsin? I don't think we have enough polling in Wisconsin to say exactly how it played out, but certainly, any time there's sort of a big confrontation like this and the 24/7 news media is trying to find angles to sustain interest, and particularly if you are a protester, you're trying to find ways for the media to stay interested so the momentum doesn't fade. This gives the story another, and so I definitely think that happened. Right. But as far as to your underlying point, is this good or bad for journalism? I think that journalists should act like journalists, and if a prankster succeeds in drawing something out of a political figure, it may be news. It may be worth doing your own reporting to see what else is there, what the broader context is, and it should be reported, with a sense of perspective and priority. When the pranksters got Sarah Palin, it was interesting to the point that she had a breakdown in her staff that allowed this to happen. She didn't actually say anything so much, if I recall, that was terribly noteworthy in and of itself. Is that a news story? Yeah, I think so. Is it the news story? Is it the most important news story? Is it the fate of America hinge upon it? Probably not.
Right. And there were at least two other, well, I would almost argue three other stories along these lines. And I'm going to go through them and we can talk about how they're similar or dissimilar. So I think the biggest story that really illustrated this point, that you have activists / bloggers using technology to basically turn politics into TMZ, or Howard Stern, as someone recently said. And then you have like journalists who are legitimate political journalists, but no longer tied to the, we got a news story tomorrow morning coming out in the paper, so we've got to provide content. There's this beast that we have to feed, this 24/7 Twitter cable news beast that we have to feed. So I do feel like it has changed politics forever. But the other stories were, we'll go through them each. I mean, one was Newt Gingrich. So Newt Gingrich has given a speech at some college, as I recall, and a student decides to, kind of ask him, you've talked about moral values or whatever, and yet you've been married a few times, 3, I think, and sort of questioned him on that. I kind of feel like 10, 15, 20 years ago, nobody would have even known that happened, unless it was, if Newt Gingrich were the presidential nominee, or if this were in New Hampshire and it was right before the election, then reporters would have been in the room and it would have gotten picked up. But my guess is 10 years ago, if Newt Gingrich at this point in the campaign, which is that he's not even declared, if a student confronted him, maybe it would be in a student newspaper, maybe National Journal's Hotline would have picked it up. I don't think. Well, first of all, did this get legs at all, Bill? Do you even know what the hell I'm talking about?
I don't know if it was as well reported as what's going on in Wisconsin right now. I mean, you have these two major stories. You have the Wisconsin showdown, and you have the uprisings in the Middle East and Libya in particular. So a lot of the 2012, pre-jockeying, I think is really only being consumed by hardcore political junkies. And so, I mean, I think any time.
That's the other thing, too, Bill. There is legitimate news. I mean, you just mentioned Libya. That is obviously a very serious, very legitimate news story. So the notion that we are obsessing about these petty things because there isn't big news, that's clearly not true. Because there is big news out there that we are and could be more.
Well, but I don't think that the media is being particularly bad in this scenario. I mean, I do think the substance of what's going on in Wisconsin has gotten a fair amount of coverage, and the substance of what's going on in the Middle East has gotten a fair amount of coverage. Maybe not to the point of perfection from yours or my perspective, but I've certainly seen worse in the past several years. But
I'm just in a grumpy mood.
I think your overall
so this is
point is fair.
And by the way, it's like don't hate the play, I hate the game, right? I mean, we're all guilty of this. And here's what I've come to, Bill, recently is like sort of what really good actors do. Is they say, I'll do one for me and one for you, right? So they'll do like some Hollywood production, and then they'll come back and do a small independent film, art house film that they want to do. I try to do that with my blogging. So I wrote a post, in one day last week, Bill, I wrote a post about Justin Bieber being pro-life, which was complete fluff, but probably got a lot of hits. And then I wrote one that was very thoughtful, took me hours to write, numerous hours, about the differences between why social conservatism isn't a modern phenomenon. It actually looks back to Edmund Burke and Aristotle, actually, even way further back. And then versus libertarianism and neo-objectivism, as someone, Jason Matera, coined the phrase in a Washington Examiner. I think he coined the phrase. But in any event, guess which one got the most hits. But my point is, if you're a writer, if you're a blogger, we all, from time to time, chase these salacious, stories that get hits and but are fleeting. But then the next story ought to be something that is substantive, that like keeps your soul, happy, and gives you a purpose as a writer.
To some degree, a drudgification of the entire media landscape, because one of the things that Drudge pioneered in the 90s, even before it was even called a blog or anything was called a blog, was he might take a regular news story, not cut and paste the headline of that story, but find a nugget in paragraph 12 that had a more salacious angle to it, and have a feel like this is what people will actually talk about. This is what will get people chatting around the water cooler. This will be the link. This will be emailed around. And that made him a de facto assignment editor to the rest of the media world. And obviously, with the advent of new media technology, you can literally see what's getting clicked and what isn't. And so that's changing a lot of people, whether you're new media or old media, what it is you'll choose to focus on, because you'll see right away what types of stories are getting clicked on and what aren't. And therefore, you end up chasing things that are more trivial in nature and not talking about the bigger picture stuff. But the one thing I think is a little bit different today, as opposed to the general chasing of salaciousness, is what the James O'Keefes of the world started doing in the past couple of years, where they tried to there's always been pranksters and people who did stunts and people that misrepresented themselves, went undercover, surreptitiously taped somebody, did an ambush. I mean, none of that stuff is all that new. It goes back to the candid camera, for Pete's sake. But James O'Keefe was trying very hard to say what he was doing was equivalent to undercover journalism, what was investigative journalism. And if you go to his Twitter page, he calls himself an investigative journalist. And when people were complaining from the left about what he did to Acorn and the new videos towards Planned Parenthood, you're selectively editing these things.
Right. Well, I don't necessarily disagree with you, but I would also argue that like some of the stuff that 60 Minutes has done in the past probably ought not to be called journalism either, because it was essentially the same thing. Bill, there was something else that happened recently, and this will get me in trouble, but what the heck. So this is not a perfect analogy by any stretch, but when the whole Lara Logan thing, right, where you have this female journalist in Libya who was viciously assaulted, obviously horrible, that reminded me a little bit, and I don't want to compare the two because they're vastly different, but you remember the uproar over James O'Keefe's, one of his most recent stunts, where he attempted to lure a CNN reporter, or allegedly attempted to lure a CNN reporter onto a boat, where he was going to, where he was allegedly going to hit on her and tape it, and there was this uproar about it, and they seemed to be sort of incredulous as to why there was this uproar, and while the two cases are obviously vastly different, it did remind me of it in the sense that female journalists putting themselves in harm's way. I mean, I think anybody, I wouldn't want to be lured onto his boat either, but I for what it's worth, I don't think anyone wrote that story. Probably good that they didn't. Because it could be misinterpreted as like a moral equivalent. But I think it did underscore this whole thing. These stunts, can have consequences, and one of the consequences could be, putting people in vulnerable situations. I think there's probably less sympathy, for example, for Governor Walker, because it was on the phone and he's a guy and he's an elected official. But this stuff, there are victims. I mean, there are victims here, and it's just like this stuff used to be like the Jerky Boys and Howard Stern, and now we're treating it like you're friggin' Bernstein or something. If you're like to be commended for engaging in this sort of kind of juvenile trickery now. Something about it seems distasteful.
Forgive me for harping on James O'Keefe here, but when the Acorn videos were proven to have been selectively edited, that should have been a discrediting moment. And if you're a traditional journalist, instead of taking that sort of video and just running with it and seeing where the chips fall, I think you have a responsibility to say, okay, someone did a prank. People do pranks. Sometimes pranks expose things of note. Let's take a breath and analyze the video and do some of our own reporting and see, is there any actual news here or not? But even after the discrediting happened, you're still seeing folks still taking these stunts and just running with it. And I think in the case of Governor Walker, it moves so quickly that maybe it's hard to pinpoint the trajectory of it. But I do feel that it didn't get completely embraced by the traditional media until the governor's office confirmed it. So once the governor said, yes, this entire 20-minute tape is what he said, then it became easier to report on it as news.
What are you going to do if a reporter is contacting you, if you're being inundated with phone calls from reporters, many of whom you have relationships with, you can't lie to them, and you can't.
You can. People do.
They had to answer that question. They had to answer.
Well, it's probably the reporter to call.
You're a
the governor. Figure. Did you say this? That's part of your job of reporting. That's what they should do.
I mean, to a certain extent, we're both public figures, and if I obviously would not do this, but I could give you could give my number out to a lefty blogger, my cell phone. If someone calls you up and says, hey, this is David Koch or whomever, you could get into a conversation with them. You could, like I say, the whole thing about, you don't want to pick a fight, you're just like laugh something off, move on. I don't know, it's just something about it. something about it I don't like.
Well, I mean, you even in the best of circumstances, even when
and then that becomes news.
What's that?
I don't know. I'm just ranting.
Well, I mean, even the best of circumstances, you don't want the entire news profession to be defined by this.
Right, and like, what's stopping? Like, why can't that be? I need to cover something. Let me do a prank call tomorrow, or it's like, it's just manufactured, nonsense.
I agree with you. It's a concern. You want to have stronger media institutions that are more focused on public interest than cheap traffic spikes.
Yeah.
To take the general, liberal critique of these sorts of issues when we had the shift towards corporate consolidation of the media and less firewalls between, multiple ownerships of various media outlets, there became more of a focus on the bottom line. And back in the old days, I mean, there's never purity in journalism. Let's not overstate or get overly nostalgic with the glory days. You often had individual media barons that ran their papers as their individual fiefdoms.
No, I mean, and this is a logical conclusion to the proliferation of technology. I mean, and some of which, by the way, I think is healthy. I mean, like, for example, during the town hall protests, right? A couple Augusts ago, the healthcare things. I mean, where you had like activists, was it Sheila Jackson Lee? I forget who it was. There was a Democratic congresswoman, I think in Texas, who was answered his cell phone in the middle of a. Do you know what I'm talking about, Bill?
I don't offhand.
Anyway, some congresswoman answered his cell phone while a constituent was asking her a question, like totally ignored it. Totally ignored the constituent, took a phone call. It got captured on video. It made the rounds. I mean, there were several occasions where things that happened in public forums at town hall meetings were captured on video by conservative activists, and they would have. Oh, I know what it was. I think there was another instance. I forget who the congresswoman or man was, where somebody and there was a plant in the crowd who asked a question, and they were able to prove somehow. In any event, but these are public forums. These are public figures, and I think that was actually healthy. And so the fact that everybody had an iPhone or a BlackBerry that could take video and upload to YouTube, in that case, so. Why am I making a distinction? Am I being hypocritical there, or is there a distinction because certain things are like legitimate and certain things are I guess the thing is, if you're at a town hall meeting, you're at a public forum, and you chose to go to a town hall meeting, and you're engaging the public, and so if you say or do something, or if you ignore constituents as this one person did, that should be fair game, as opposed to the activist instigating the situation by engaging the phone call.
The technology is what it is, and it impacts the conversation, impacts what people see and consume, and will impact politicians' behavior. When you can't put that back in the bottle, you can have a traditional media infrastructure that's not completely submissive to that. Because you can always take a clip of an instance at a town hall meeting or an exchange on the street and give it a false connotation. You called to my attention this clip that Freedom Works is pushing and Michelle Malkin is pushing, where a union protester in Wisconsin, from their characterization, actually hit a young woman who was holding a camera in the guy's face. But when you look at the video, it's not all clear that that's exactly what happened. I mean, all you're seeing is literally this close-up shot of the guy. You can't even see his arms. I mean, maybe it happened that way, but I feel like you could draw that conclusion from the video itself.
Right. Well, I know Tabitha Hale. I know her, great lady, does new media for Freedom Works. Organizes the BlogCon conference. She's like 5'1". Obviously, this pictures of sort of a tough, edgy kind of union guy. She's holding the video, so it's not like there's a third party holding it. She's like holding the camera, probably in his face, and it appears like he pushes her down. But you're right, Bill. It's
you don't
unclear.
Even see her.
All you see is you just see like a camera going backward. But here's the other thing, Bill. John McCormick, remember the Weekly Standard guy, good reporter. But he had these two instances. One where Didi Scozafava, New York 23, calls the cops on him. Another one where Martha Coakley, one of her guys, pushes him down. It's funny. I mean, it occurred to me the other day, Bill, that the most notable thing I've done in my career is quit my job. I don't think it's the most important thing I've done, but it's arguably the thing that got me the most attention was leaving my job. And I think the biggest thing John McCormick's ever done is get pushed down. Doesn't mean it's the best thing. He's obviously written good stuff. He's a good writer, but the thing that defines him, is having the cops called on him and being pushed down. It just strikes me that for whatever reason, you have these situations where people, especially activists, if you can get someone, and I'm not saying that she did this, again, I like Tabitha, great girl, I'm going to take her, it appears that she was pushed. Since I know her and I don't know the union guy, I completely believe her. And the videotape, in my opinion, appears to confirm that. But whatever the case may be, it does appear that we have a situation where these sort of instances can get press. You can get something going, and again, this is the kind of thing that, even 5 years ago, probably isn't a story. Now, it becomes a somewhat big story, as long as there's another story to go along with it. So for example, the story with Tabitha being pushed down. So, that ties into the Wisconsin story, but it keeps the story alive. It gives it legs. It's a tie-in. So anyway, what's your take on it?
I think what we both want out of this is, regardless of whose story you believe, an instance like that, you want there to be a separate media infrastructure that doesn't base everything on a slice of video, because a slice of video or a photograph or a snippet of an audio conversation often does not tell the full story. That's why you want to do things like reporting, talk to witnesses, talk to the players, find out what other explanation might have been. Maybe it was accidental, maybe it was purposeful. Maybe you can try to discern that from who else you talk to.
The optics are not. I mean, Tabitha's a very cute and as I said, about 5'1" young lady versus this sort of stereotypical union. I'll use the word thug. Others may say, I don't know, hero of the working man. Whatever the case, the optics for this guy are not good, and this is a classic example of video really working. I'm not saying that she provoked it, because frankly, I don't think you can provoke somebody to push you. In other words, it's like blaming the victim. Like, if she got in his face and told him to F off, he still shouldn't push her or hit a girl or whatever, or anybody for that matter. Having said that, it's very well made for video. Obviously, it wasn't a setup, or they would have had a third camera instead of just her camera. But whatever the case may be, she used Twit video to tweet it out immediately. It was up on YouTube. Michelle Malk, she was on Glenn Beck's radio show. So my point is, though, this is also driving the news. I think this is much more legitimate of a story than the prank phone call. But in any case, this got a good bit of traction, but we're not talking about Egypt or Libya or whatever.
Well, but I don't think. I think people are talking about Egypt and Libya. I don't think that story has been completely marginalized. And there are also great examples where new media, I think, has been quite integral. There was a bit of a debate between Malcolm Gladwell of The New Yorker and Ari Melber of The Nation. Malcolm Gladwell put out this theory that new media is not a major factor in these protests, and sort of making the case that people have protested before. People have figured out how to get on the street without having Facebook and Twitter. It's possible. But Mel will point out that doesn't mean, just because it has been done in the past, doesn't mean that it hasn't been made easier or more powerful or more effective by these tools. And it certainly.
And by the way, there was a similar debate on the right. Patrick Ruffini, who's sort of a tech guru, sent something out, that basically said that technology means that, tyrants and dictators won't be able, their days are numbered. because they won't be able to use technology. Now they'll be caught. It's going to be transparent. The internet saves the world. And Josh Trevino, another, co-founder of Red State, another conservative, somewhat tech-savvy guy, but also kind of a foreign policy guy, too, very pushed back strongly on that, arguing that, dictators and tyrants can use technology to spy on people or to turn off the internet or whatever, so that it's somewhat quixotic and utopian to think that that technology will make the world a safer place. I mean, this is a very interesting debate taking place.
I think the underlying point there is, into our earlier discussion, all these things are tools. Tools can be used for good or for bad.
Right.
And
the better
Al-Qaeda
the tool,
uses these tools for bad, and some of these protesters in Egypt and Libya are using them for good. And I think as far as it being a net
and the
positive,
more advanced the technology gets, the better the technology gets, the more extreme the good and the evil, I think, right?
Possibly. But certainly as of late, it seems like it has empowered secular groups, particularly in Egypt. It's empowered not necessarily secular groups in countries like Bahrain and Yemen, but the Egypt and Libya protests are not really Islamist in tone. They're more general grievances towards the economic plights and political freedoms of their country. And whereas before Al-Qaeda was able to exploit these grievances to their ends, now these folks are able to kind of take issues into their own hands with some confidence that, hey, if I go out into the street, there's going to be a camera here that's going to let the wider world know that I was here. I'm not going to get shot down and gunned down like in Tiananmen Square, and no one's going to see it. So it seems to be, for the moment, being a net positive, but it doesn't mean that it's strictly a positive or that's a panacea and that none of these things can be used for ill ends. And the best check you have on all this stuff, to go back to the original point, is to have a solid public service media that puts things in proper context and doesn't just chase traffic all the time.
Well, let me ask you too, Bill. This is off topic, but it's on topic with Libya, but it's off topic with the whole sort of theme of today's show. But just strictly turning to Libya. I was out in Seattle this week for the past 4 days. Got to meet Russell Simmons, which was very cool. Got to go to the Space Needle, which was cool. But the point of my trip was to go on Dylan Radigan, who's doing his Steel on Wheels tour. And I made the case that Obama, and remember, I defended him, his sort of slow response and his sort of nuanced response to Egypt and Mubarak. But in the case of Libya, I really feel like he's been late to the game and has not been a forceful advocate for freedom against Gaddafi. And I get the sense that liberals are in agreement with me on that. Am I wrong? Is there a sense that Obama is always too late, always too measured?
Well, I wouldn't be too quick to characterize liberals en masse on the subject. I would assume there are differences of opinion. There's certainly some liberals, particularly some of the more noted voices in the blogosphere, that have not trusted Obama's approach to this and not presumed he is operating on the premise of democracy and freedom first. It's not my personal view, but I certainly know that it's out there. And I think there's a general bias. I don't think this is true of just liberals. I think it's true of liberals and certain conservatives and media commentators and academics in general, a bias towards wanting to see specificity and clarity. I want to see my public figure say something very, short and to the point, and therefore I know where that person stands at this moment. And in a very sensitive and volatile, fluid foreign policy situation, that might not be the best tactic. Maybe it is. It's hard to definitively prove these things one way or the other. But it doesn't strike me as being QED that if President doesn't say X immediately, loudly, repeatedly, that means President is not doing or pursuing that goal.
And that's why I defended him in the case of Egypt. I mean, because that was such a complicated situation. You have an ally of America. If you undercut Mubarak, you send a bad message to all of your allies. If you don't undercut him, or if you don't, you send a bad message about freedom and supporting, the right to, to freedom and protest and all that. But I thought Libya was much more clear-cut. I mean, as usual, Bill, the problem isn't this situation itself; it's these narratives. And there is this long developing, just like with Newt Gingrich, as we talked about earlier. He has this narrative that he has to deal with about his personal life. Obama, this narrative is that he's always late. He just takes a couple days too long before he gets to where he should be. Well, I just think
that's a narrative, and maybe it will become a dominant narrative. I think there's another narrative, which is that Obama is careful, is not willing to be rash, not willing to do something for the sake of political grandstanding at the risk of having an effective policy. And as he said in the postmortem to Egypt, he said very explicitly, this needed to be seen as being an Egyptian action, not an American action. And so, if we were too overbearing in our commentary, people would have viewed the protests in a different light, and that might have given a dictator a foil to help divide the people. And I'm sure the same thing is in place in Libya. I thought it's very notable that Gaddafi is not accusing the protesters of being American stooges. He's accusing them of being part of Al Qaeda. That shows you how weak it would be to try to blame America as being a meddling power in this case. And I think that's a testament to the way Obama handles these things. But taking that kind of measured and relatively low key approach runs the risk of not making sense for yourself in a short-term political sense, of being hit with a narrative that you're not leading or controlling or managing or whatever. But you have to have some faith in your style and some acceptance of your limitations, that you're not dictator of the world and can't bend everything to your will. But some hope that handling it in that kind of way is going to lead to the best outcome, and that will be clearer once the dust settles.
Very good. Well, I think it's probably a good place to stop. What do you think?
Always good to talk to you, Matt. Did you manage to get yourself any Top Pot donuts in Seattle?
No, but I did go to the original Starbucks on Pike's Place.
Is the coffee better there?
No, it tastes exactly the same. But I got some cool pictures. But no, if I know you've been, but if folks haven't been, go to Seattle. It's a great city, and just a ton of. By the way, a ton of great restaurants. Man, even the airport. I ate at the restaurant at the airport, a seafood restaurant. It's called Anthony's, I think. It's better than most. It would have been good had it not been at the airport. So I ate great, and celebrity sightings. Got to mix in some work and pleasure. But
I'd also argue that the best train ride in North America is the train from Seattle to Vancouver.
Oh yeah, I drove one time. I did a trip where I drove from Portland to Olympia to Seattle to Vancouver. But you intrigued me, Bill. We're gonna have to talk offline because I liked it so much that I'm thinking of going back and doing Seattle and Vancouver. And I was going to drive, but now you've intrigued me.
Well, Vancouver's good for food and good for celebrity sightings because they shoot a lot of movies and TV shows there, pretending it's New York.
Yeah, it's beautiful city, and I think people, you should go there if you're looking to get away and go on a little vacation somewhere. 3 or 4 days. We went to the art museum, SAM as they call it, Seattle Art Museum, I guess. Which is cool, but it's just a great city, very walkable. As a new urbanist, I greatly enjoy that, and so it was a fabulous time. Check it out, and of course, Russ.
I didn't know you consider yourself a new urbanist.
Well, I joke a little bit. I think I'm a new urbanist temperamentally. Like, I want to live in a walkable city. I want to live in a place where I can like walk to the grocery store, or a restaurant, bar. I just don't want to force other people to do that using my using policy. But yeah, I think, personally, I love walkable cities, and I absolutely hate like sprawl. It's just eyesores. So
sound like another arugula-eating NPR hippie to me.
Actually, it's funny. One of my buddies from high school, who's a conservative, I put up a picture of me on Facebook at the original Starbucks, and he just put up one word, hippie. So, yeah, good times. All right, buddy. Good talking with you. All right, man. I'll catch you soon.
Take care.